The first time my older brother placed our father's pocket watch into my hand after nearly 9 years without speaking to me, I believed the hardest part would be hearing his voice again. I was wrong. The moment I opened the cover, my stomach tightened. The engraving inside wasn't the one I had memorized as a 12-year-old boy, standing beside my father on the courthouse steps after he retired. The words had changed, not faded, not worn away, changed. Someone had removed the sentence my father asked me to read every birthday for nearly 50 years and replaced it with another dedication that felt strangely unfamiliar. If memory had failed me, then everything I believed about my father suddenly deserved questioning. If memory had not failed me, someone had rewritten the last message he intended our family to carry. If you've ever trusted your own memory, even when everyone around you politely disagreed, stay with me for a little while. For several long moments, neither my brother nor I spoke. The old pocket watch rested quietly across my palm. The silver case still carried the same small dent near the hinge where Dad dropped it while repairing our front porch decades earlier. The winding crown felt exactly the same. The ticking sounded exactly the same. Only the engraving looked different. David finally broke the silence. "I think you're remembering it wrong." "I don't think I am." "Sam, people remember what they expect to remember." Technically possible. Emotionally incomplete. During 29 years serving as a National Guard training coordinator, I reviewed thousands of qualification records. One lesson never stopped proving itself. Memory deserved respect. Documentation deserved trust. When the two disagreed, neither should be dismissed until the evidence spoke. Instead of arguing, I quietly closed the watch. "I appreciate you bringing it." Relief briefly crossed David's face. He believed the conversation had ended. That afternoon, I climbed into the attic, searching through old family boxes, not looking for another watch, looking for proof. Nearly an hour later, I found a faded church memorial photograph taken the year Dad donated the new sanctuary clock. He stood smiling beside David and me. His pocket watch rested open in his hand. The image was grainy, barely large enough to study, but after holding a magnifying glass over the photograph, I could clearly make out the first 3 words of the engraving. They matched my memory, not the inscription now resting inside the watch. Driving back downstairs, I no longer wondered whether I remembered correctly. I wondered when the engraving had changed. As I carefully returned the photograph to its envelope, another small detail caught my attention. Dad had written one sentence across the back in blue fountain pen. "The watch always tells the truth if no one changes the inside." I carried my father's pocket watch home without opening it again. Some questions deserved patience before they deserved answers. During 29 years coordinating National Guard training records, I learned another lesson that rarely failed. When one document contradicted a lifetime of memory, the missing paperwork usually mattered more than the loudest opinion. That evening, my older brother David stopped by, carrying a small paper sack from the bakery our father visited every Saturday morning. "I figured you hadn't eaten." "You figured right." For several minutes we shared coffee without mentioning the watch. Finally, he spoke. "I know this has been unsettling." "The engraving?" He nodded. "I honestly think Dad had it changed years ago." Technically possible, emotionally incomplete. I looked at him carefully. You remember him doing that? I remember him talking about it. Talking, not doing. The difference quietly settled into my thoughts. Instead of arguing, I simply nodded. Maybe you're right. Visible relief crossed David's face. He believed I had accepted his explanation. Before leaving, he quietly placed one folded document beside my coffee cup. I found this while cleaning the estate boxes. It was a copy of our father's estate inventory. Every major family heirloom appeared exactly where I expected. His military medals, mother's wedding ring, the family Bible, the silver pocket watch. Then one line quietly refused to fit. Pocket watch, recently restored and documented. Restored, not engraved, not modified, just restored. The next morning, I drove to Ellis Jewelers, the small downtown shop that had repaired our family's watches for more than 60 years. Margaret Ellis looked up from her workbench and smiled. Samuel Turner, I haven't seen you since your father's memorial. I have a question about his watch. She immediately became quieter. I wondered when you'd ask. Not if. When? Without another word, she unlocked a filing cabinet behind the counter. Inside rested decades of handwritten repair records, organized alphabetically by family name. She carefully removed one worn envelope. Across the front, my father had written only one sentence: release after both sons have seen the watch. Not after my death. Not after probate. After both sons had seen it, Margaret placed the envelope on the counter but didn't hand it to me. I can't open it. I know. Your father left very specific instructions. Another technically honest answer. Emotionally unfinished. Instead, she handed me the repair invoice. The work order listed crystal polishing, hinge adjustment, movement cleaning, and one final entry. Interior inscription work authorized under sealed instruction. I read the line twice, then a third time. The engraving had indeed been changed, but not secretly, not illegally. Someone had followed written instructions. Driving home, I no longer wondered whether David had lied. I wondered whose instructions the jeweler had obeyed. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed an old family album waiting on my front porch. No note, no return address. Tucked inside the front cover rested a photograph of my father holding the watch beside the church memorial display. Across the bottom, he had written in blue ink, "Some promises must be read twice before they're understood." For the next 4 days, I behaved exactly the way my brother expected. I stopped mentioning the pocket watch. I thanked him for bringing it home. I even admitted that perhaps time had blurred more childhood memories than I wanted to believe. David smiled with visible relief. Not because the mystery had disappeared, because he believed I had stopped looking for it. During 29 years coordinating National Guard training programs, I learned another lesson that quietly solved more disputes than any policy manual. The moment people believed you had stopped checking the records, they stopped protecting them. That became my strategy. On Tuesday morning, I returned to Ellis Jewelers before the shop officially opened. Margaret Ellis was already polishing an antique mantel clock beneath the front window. I had a feeling you'd be back. I've been thinking about Dad's repair invoice. So have I. Without another word, she unlocked the workshop archive. Unlike the public repair files, these drawers held sealed restoration records dating back almost 70 years. She carefully removed a leather binder labeled Turner Family Restorations. Inside rested receipts for my mother's wedding ring, my grandfather's railroad watch, my father's military service pin. Then one entry immediately caught my attention. Pocket watch, restoration under deferred instruction. Deferred, not completed. Deferred. Margaret noticed me studying the wording. Your father chose that phrase himself. What did he mean? He said the repair wouldn't truly be finished until both of his sons understood why it had been necessary. Technically complete, emotionally unfinished. Instead of asking another question, I quietly turned the page. Attached to the repair record was a tracing made on thin drafting paper, not of the replacement inscription, of the original engraving. Someone had carefully copied every letter before any restoration work began. The words matched exactly what I remembered from childhood. For the first time since David returned the watch, my memory no longer stood alone. It now had documentary support. Driving home, I realized something unexpected. The altered engraving had never been intended to erase the original. It had been intended to protect it. That afternoon, my grandson Ethan stopped by after school, carrying an old cardboard box he found while helping organize the Veterans Museum storage room. I think this belonged to Great-Grandpa. Inside rested several church memorial programs, old newspaper clippings, and a small envelope tucked beneath the bottom layer. Across the front, my father had written only 5 words. Open after restoration begins. Not after my death. Not after probate. After restoration begins. Inside, I found 2 thin paper impressions taken from the inside cover of the pocket watch. One showed the original engraving, the other showed the altered version. At the bottom, my father had written a single sentence. People who only compare the words will miss the promise between them. For several long moments, Ethan and I simply looked at each other. Finally, he asked, "Did Great-Grandpa expect someone to change it?" I think. I carefully folded the impressions back into the envelope. I think he expected someone to misunderstand it. As I returned everything to the box, one final document slipped onto the table. It wasn't another repair record. It was the first page of my father's handwritten journal. I carried my father's handwritten journal home, as though the worn leather cover might fall apart if I held it too tightly. The first page contained no confession, no explanation, only one sentence written in the careful blue fountain pen script I had watched him practice for years. When words become more valuable than watches, change the words before someone mistakes the watch for the inheritance. I read it twice, then a third time. The altered engraving was never intended to deceive. It was intended to interrupt. During 29 years coordinating National Guard training programs, I often reminded younger instructors that the first question people asked after reading a document usually revealed more than the document itself. Dad had designed the engraving to create exactly that moment. He wanted someone to ask why. That evening I spread every piece of evidence across my dining room table. The family photograph, the repair invoice, the tracing of the original inscription, the paper impressions, the first journal page. Each document quietly repeated the same idea. The watch mattered less than the words. Laura, the museum archivist where I volunteered twice each week, stopped by to return several donated military journals. She noticed my father's notebook immediately. "I haven't seen one of these in years." "It belonged to Dad." She carefully turned only a single page before stopping. "Samuel? What? Your father didn't keep a diary. He kept indexed journals." She pointed toward a narrow column running down the right margin. Every entry carried a reference number, cross-references, archive codes, document locations, not private reflections. A retrieval system. Driving to the Veterans Museum the following morning, I suddenly understood why my father had always written so methodically. He expected someone to verify every important memory, not trust it blindly. At the museum archive room, Laura unlocked an old filing cabinet containing donated church history materials awaiting cataloging. I remembered seeing your father's handwriting somewhere. Several carefully labeled folders later, she found it, Turner Memorial Collection. Inside rested church memorial programs, volunteer records, and correspondence from the years following my mother's passing. Then one folded sheet immediately caught my attention. It wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't addressed to David. It was addressed to the pastor. Across the top, my father had written, "To be opened only if the memorial watch inscription is ever questioned." Questioned, not changed, not disputed. Questioned. Laura quietly looked at me. "I think your father planned further ahead than anyone realized." Technically complete, emotionally overwhelming. Inside the letter, my father explained only one thing. The engraving must temporarily change before the family memorial, or people will protect the object instead of discovering the promise. The explanation already exists elsewhere. Do not reveal it until every supporting record can stand beside it. No location, no direct answer, only another documentary instruction. Track A had suddenly become much larger. As I carefully returned the letter to its envelope, one final attachment slipped free. It wasn't another journal page. It was a copy of the annual memorial service program for the coming Sunday. One line near the bottom had been quietly underlined in blue ink. Presentation of the family legacy dedication. Presentation. Not inheritance, not distribution. The memorial service had never been intended to remember only my father. It had been designed to reveal something he had spent years preparing, and for the first time since opening the pocket watch, I realized the engraving wasn't the mystery anymore. The real mystery was what the dedication planned to reveal only 4 days from now. 5 days remained before our family's annual memorial service. 5 days before my father's carefully planned dedication would either reveal the truth or disappear beneath years of misunderstanding. I placed every document across the dining room table. The altered pocket watch, the repair invoice, the tracing of the original engraving, the church letter, the indexed journal. Each piece belonged to the same story. Only one part remained missing. During 29 years coordinating National Guard training records, I learned another lesson that quietly prevented more administrative failures than any inspection checklist. when every file agrees except one. The missing file usually carries the only signature that truly matters. That afternoon, my brother David called. "I heard you've been visiting Margaret Ellis." "I have." A long silence followed. Finally, he said, "I wish Dad had explained things differently." "So do I." Technically honest, emotionally unfinished. "I never wanted you to think I changed the engraving." "I know." For the first time since he returned the watch, those words were completely true. I no longer believed David had acted alone, or even acted freely. After we hung up, I drove to the county probate archives, hoping to review the complete estate inventory. Instead, I found the records temporarily unavailable. Charles Benton, the estate administrator, met me in the hallway. "Mr. Turner, I understand you're reviewing your father's documents." "I am." He smiled politely. Everything important was already included during probate. Technically possible, emotionally incomplete. "I'd still like to review the archived inventory. I'm afraid those files are currently being reorganized." Reorganized, not unavailable. Another carefully chosen word. Rather than argue, I simply thanked him and left. Strategic surrender still served me better than confrontation. Driving toward home, I stopped at the church memorial room, where volunteers were quietly arranging photographs for Sunday's service. Laura, the museum archivist, happened to be helping. "I found something tucked inside your father's memorial album." She handed me an old insurance photograph taken years before the watch had supposedly been restored. The image clearly showed the original engraving. More importantly, the insurance appraisal identified one attached exhibit, engraving verification sheet. Verification, not description. That exhibit no longer appeared anywhere inside the probate inventory. Track A suddenly lost an important piece. Real loss, not uncertainty. Laura quietly looked toward me. "Do you think someone removed it?" "I think someone expected nobody to notice it existed." That evening, Margaret Ellis called. "I've searched every repair archive, and I've found the authorization number, but not the authorization itself." The document had existed. Now it was gone. For the first time since opening the pocket watch, I experienced something I had carefully avoided. Not anger, not suspicion, discouragement. Without the engraving verification sheet, without the restoration authorization, the documentary chain could not stand on its own. Just before sunset, my grandson Ethan quietly knocked on the front door. "I found this inside Great-Grandpa's Bible." He handed me a folded church bulletin. Inside rested only one handwritten sentence. "If the record disappears, follow the photographs before following the paperwork." No explanation, only another instruction. Then Ethan unfolded one final item hidden behind the bulletin. A small negative from an old camera, not a print, the original photographic negative. The image hadn't yet been developed, but written across the protective sleeve were 7 words that changed everything. Original engraving before memorial restoration. Master archive copy. For the first time since this investigation began, I realized the evidence hadn't been destroyed. Someone had simply divided it. And somewhere before Sunday's memorial service, those separated pieces still had to become one complete truth. I slipped the undeveloped photographic negative into the same envelope as my father's journal page. For the first time since my brother returned the pocket watch, I stopped thinking about the engraving itself. The real evidence had never been the words. It was the chain connecting every document to those words. During 29 years coordinating National Guard training records, I learned something every instructor eventually discovered. One missing form rarely destroyed the truth. It only delayed the moment when the entire file could finally speak for itself. The next morning, Margaret Ellis called before the jewelry shop opened. I found something. Not the authorization. No. Something better. Within half an hour, I was standing inside her workshop. She carefully removed a long, narrow register from a locked cabinet. Across the cover appeared one title, Master Engraving Ledger. Every restoration completed by the shop over nearly 80 years had been recorded by hand. Date, customer, object, authorization number, reference documents. When we reached my father's entry, every column appeared complete, except one. Instead of describing the wording engraved inside the watch, the final column simply read, See Restoration Authorization Package. Package, not page. Margaret quietly looked toward me. The authorization was never supposed to remain here. It traveled with something larger. Track A suddenly shifted. The missing document wasn't lost. It belonged somewhere else. That afternoon, I returned to the county archives. Charles Benton was already locking several estate cabinets before the weekend. I thought you might come back. I've been reviewing Dad's repair records. He smiled politely. I hope they've been helpful. They've raised interesting questions. So have old photographs. Technically true, emotionally defensive. I deliberately said nothing more. Strategic surrender had become more valuable than confrontation. Charles visibly relaxed. He believed I still lacked the missing piece. Before leaving the archive room, I noticed one oversized storage box sitting alone on a transfer cart. Across the shipping label, someone had written, Turner Memorial Presentation Materials. Presentation. The same phrase underlined inside the church program. Driving directly to the church, I found volunteers arranging photographs inside the fellowship hall. Pastor William greeted me warmly. Samuel, I've been expecting you. You have? He nodded. Your father left instructions that if you ever asked about the memorial presentation. He quietly unlocked a cedar cabinet beneath the display cases. Inside rested several sealed archival folders. One carried the exact authorization number Margaret found inside the Master Engraving Ledger. My pulse quickened. Pastor William carefully placed the folder on the table, but did not open it. I promised your father this package would remain sealed until every supporting record existed. I think it finally does. He smiled gently. I believe you're right. Inside rested the missing restoration authorization package. Not one document. Many. The original engraving template. Jeweler instructions. Insurance verification. Estate references. Church archive certification. Every document cross-referenced the others. Track A had become Track B. The documentary chain now stood complete. Nothing depended on memory anymore. Nothing depended on opinion. Then I reached the final page. My father's signed instruction authorizing the temporary engraving. At the bottom, he had written one handwritten sentence. If my sons are still arguing about who deserves this watch, leave the new engraving in place. If they are searching together for the truth instead, restore the original words. For several long moments I couldn't speak. Pastor William quietly handed me the pocket watch. The decision has never belonged to the church. It belongs to your family. I gently closed the authorization package, then placed the watch back inside my pocket. Tomorrow's memorial service would determine whether my father's final condition had truly been fulfilled. For now, I chose to leave the altered engraving exactly where it was. The sanctuary filled quietly long before the annual memorial service began. Families who had known my father for decades greeted one another in hushed voices. Veterans from his old American Legion post sat together near the front. Children who had never met him carried white carnations toward the memorial table. Everything appeared exactly as it had every year, except this year. My father's pocket watch rested alone beneath a small glass display case. The altered engraving remained inside, exactly where I had chosen to leave it. David arrived a few minutes later. He looked at the watch, then at me. "You didn't change it?" "No." For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he quietly asked, "Did you find everything?" "I found enough." Not every answer, just enough truth. During 29 years coordinating National Guard training programs, I learned one lesson that mattered more than every inspection report I ever completed. Evidence should never speak louder than character. It should simply allow character to become visible. Pastor William stepped to the lectern. "Before today's remembrance, there is one final instruction your father asked us to complete." The sanctuary became completely silent. He carried the sealed restoration authorization package toward the memorial table. I was instructed to open this only if Samuel and David reached this day, searching for truth together rather than competing for inheritance. David slowly lowered his eyes. "I almost ruined that." So did I. The words surprised even me. For years I believed our silence began after our father's death. Now I realized it had begun long before. Pastor William carefully arranged every document across the display table. The original engraving template, the jeweler's authorization, insurance photographs, estate inventories, church archive certifications, my father's indexed journal. Every record naturally confirmed the next. Nothing depended upon memory. Nothing depended upon accusation. Track A quietly became Track B. Then Pastor William unfolded the final page, my father's handwritten dedication, not to one son, to both. If you are reading this together, then the watch has already fulfilled its purpose. The engraving was never changed to choose an heir. It was changed to reveal whether either of you still believed an heirloom could matter more than your brother. Restore the original words only after you decide that neither of you owns this watch alone. No one spoke. No dramatic music. Only silence. David quietly stepped beside me. "I was so afraid you'd think I betrayed Dad." "I did. And I was wrong." He nodded. "So was I." Margaret Ellis approached carrying a small velvet case. Inside rested the original engraved cover plate she had carefully preserved for years. It had never been destroyed, only protected. Pastor William looked toward both of us. The decision belongs to you. Neither David nor I reached for the watch. Instead, we looked at each other. Finally, David smiled. I think Dad's condition has finally been met. So do I. Margaret carefully restored the original engraved plate while every member of the congregation quietly watched. No applause followed, only tears. Not because an old watch looked different again, because everyone understood the restoration had never truly been about silver. It had always been about two brothers finding their way back before restoring the words their father trusted them to carry. Then Charles Benton slowly stood from the back pew. "I owe your family an apology," he admitted, withholding portions of the estate archive because he believed simplifying the records would prevent conflict. Instead, his shortcuts had nearly buried the very truth they were meant to protect. The church board immediately announced an independent review of every archived estate document under his supervision. Justice had begun, but the greatest restoration still waited outside the church doors. For the first time in nearly a decade, my brother and I walked out together. The morning after our family's memorial service, I unlocked the Veterans Museum before anyone else arrived. For the first time in years, my father's pocket watch rested comfortably in my coat pocket, not because it belonged to me, because my brother had insisted I carry it first. Outside, the courthouse bell struck 8. Inside, sunlight settled across the old display cases where generations of military families had quietly entrusted their stories to strangers. David arrived carrying a small cedar box. I found this in Dad's desk after everything else was finished. Not another legal document, not another journal, just one small wooden box. Inside rested a folded letter and 2 simple brass nameplates. One carried my father's name. The other was completely blank. I unfolded the letter. My sons, if you have restored the original engraving, then you have already discovered the truth. The watch was never my greatest inheritance. It was only the question that led you to it. I paused. The familiar ticking quietly echoed through the museum. Then I continued reading. The blank nameplate belongs to whoever spends the rest of his life protecting our family's character rather than our family's possessions. Don't engrave it today. Let someone else decide, years from now, whether either of you truly earned it. Neither David nor I spoke. For the first time since childhood, silence no longer separated us. It united us. David smiled. Dad always thought further ahead than we did. He still does. Together we placed the cedar box inside the museum's Family Heritage Collection, not behind locked glass, inside a working archive where future volunteers could continue preserving local history. The restored pocket watch remained with our family, but neither of us claimed exclusive ownership. Instead, every Memorial Day one of us would carry it during the remembrance ceremony before passing it to the other the following year. The watch would continue moving, just as our father intended. Several months later, Ethan became the youngest volunteer ever accepted into the museum archive program. On his first day, he carefully wound the pocket watch before placing it inside the display prepared for our family's history exhibit. He looked up at me and quietly asked, "Do you think Great-Grandpa would be happy?" I smiled. "I think he'd be more interested in what you choose to protect next." Above the display case, We mounted my father's original engraved words, exactly as they had first appeared decades earlier. Beside them rested the blank brass nameplate, still waiting, still unearned. If this story reminded you that the greatest inheritance is never the object left behind, but the character required to carry its meaning, thank you for sharing this journey. May your family's memories always lead you toward truth. May your legacy be measured by the lives you quietly strengthen, and may the promises you keep become the finest inheritance you ever leave behind.